Okay, so we have an hour together, and every minute I think is going to be a precious minute and moments well spent together. So I'm going to start, and there will probably be some that will join as we go along as well. But firstly, welcome to everybody to today's webinar on the relationship between ego and leadership, with our guest speaker who's currently sitting in Iceland, his home country, Thor Olafsson, the CEO of the Strategic Leadership Group, founder of a non-profit called beyondego.com, an executive coach, well-seasoned coach, speaker, and author. And to those of you that don't know me, my name is Anita Craig. I am the founder of Flow, innerFLOW, and the Master Leader Program. And I'm based in Johannesburg, South Africa, on this call, and that's where I work and reside as well. So really today's dialogue is with Thor, and thank you, Thor, for being here. You're 2 days away from your new book launch, which we will get to and speak about on this call. But really, what is so exciting for me is for us to be able to share in this very incredible and worthwhile gift and service that you're now offering to individuals and leaders joining us here today. And people have come to seek out further insight, answers to their heartfelt questions, and real workplace leadership challenges, that I think is commonplace, whether we're sitting here in South Africa, whether we're sitting in Germany, in Iceland, in the UK, or wherever we might be joining from today. But to set the scene, and I'm going to take a little bit of time to do this because I feel that it's going to bear justice to set the context and the scene for today's conversation, as it's a juicy conversation, but it also has currents that can run really deep. So I invite you just to listen and hear some of the backdrop and the context for how and why it's touched my heart and come about that Thor and I connected on LinkedIn, and how we found the space to be able to offer it in dialogue with you all today. So just a bit about Thor. He's founded several different companies in 4 different countries before deciding to concentrate his efforts on his group of strategic leadership companies. And he's currently got a team of over 40 executive coaches, leadership trainers in countries around the globe. He specializes in coaching senior teams on becoming conscious strategic leaders, and he works individually as well with top-level executives. He works with CEOs, MDs, and people who are really moving towards higher levels of responsibility in organizations. And to quote from Thor around why he decided to form Beyond Ego, his nonprofit, is we believe that when leaders operate beyond their ego, they are better leaders, better for the people who follow them and the world that we live in. In the last 20 years, we've seen how ego-free leaders are better able to create purpose-driven and highly functional teams that can transition beyond the fear that ego-based leadership creates, and that feel psychologically safe to speak up and fully engage. We've also seen how ego-free leaders create organizations that are inspired by meaningful vision, guided by higher values, and who collaborate on exciting, truly sustainable strategies. So Beyond Ego exists to help champion the cause of leading beyond ego, which happens to be the title of Thor's book. And it's a contribution to the corporate world that is about co-creating. And in simple terms, Beyond Ego aims to help leaders around the world as possible to identify and move beyond their very own ego patterns. So that's a lot said, but there's so much in there. And having worked in a similar space and knowing many of you on the call today, having possibly taken up positions either within organizations or partnering organizations, this for me is really getting to the bull's eye of where the future of leadership and organizations are moving to today. And I'd love to just take a moment to ground you and introduce you to innerFLOW and a little bit about myself for those as context who don't yet know the work that I've put out into the world as well. But this webinar was really the soul-led response to the planetary context that we live in today and that is calling us. And you know, before COVID arrived, my work as a leader, a coach, a facilitator, a change management specialist, it was all satisfying, it was rewarding, and it was financially rewarding, all to a point. But something else was nudging much deeper inside me. And I knew what it was, but I always kept trying to keep it to one side. I didn't really want to listen to that deep inner voice that was trying to have a voice and speak, actually for the fear of being labeled as one of those woohoo, out there, nuts, ungrounded, out to lunch with the fairies kind of woman, you know, that just actually doesn't give justice to this body of work that's being offered and served to people. So what happened through COVID, like many of us, is that our outer world of traditional corporate consultancy just dissolved overnight. And I knew then that this inner core of truth, my real inner compass, was now given this opportunity to birth itself, to serve humanity, one leader, one individual at a time, in finding and giving birth to this new true purpose. And this came through real trials and tribulations, some shattering life, health, work, financial, relationship experiences that literally left me rising like a phoenix from the flames. And I think many of us can relate to this experience in that it's challenged us to depths and levels that we just cannot return back to the old ways. But the essence remained. And for me, this essence was deeply honoring what is here was now to live out my highest purpose and living out my highest calling in the most truthful and aligned and best possible way that I could as a human being, serving humanity. And this was birthed as a result. The Master Leader Program was birthed during this time, and innerFLOW was birthed during this time. And it took layers and layers of processing, integrating all of this, being a spiritual teacher, a leader, an intuitive guide and channel and mentor. And I realized that somehow as humans, how many of us are actually trying to integrate all these different parts and aspects of ourselves. And when I came across Thor and his work, I recognized that here's a man and a leader who's gone through maybe not the same journey, but a similar process over 10 years to birth his work on the inner compass and working beyond ego. And so that's why today we're here sitting together. And I just invite you to take this time to offer it to yourself, to reconnect with yourself, ask the questions around this context and theme that you're going to get most benefit from. Because I think we're here to contribute to the conversation around redefining leadership. So opening up the dialogue firstly to Thor, and then to those that would like to participate with questions, you're welcome to pop them in the chat, and I'll circle around to them later on. But really, Thor, to ask you, first of all, to set the stage for all of us is, how do you define ego?
Firstly, great to be here, Anita. And if we get the chance, I would love to hear from the people who are here with us. But defining ego, big question. And I'd like to start in a little story. I think about 13 years ago, 2009-10, I was doing a strategy workshop. I had been doing a number of them and I'm watching the executives work on a new strategy at different pin boards, so in pairs and trios, and they're doing different projects. And it was a moment of insight, and that I later addressed with the group, where it became apparent that a number of the people there were driven by a very personal agenda. They were trying to defend their part of the business so that in the new strategy they would still exist and still have the influence that they had had. Some other ones were obviously trying to enlarge their area. And it became clear to me at that moment, if we are all stuck in thinking what's best for me and me, how do we end up with something that's best for the company, best for the environment, customers, planet, etc.? And that was a trigger point for me, saying, okay, if I and my team, if we are ever to be successful in working with these executives on something sustainable, something meaningful, we need to get past this agenda of me. And so I started exploring it. And what is then ego? One way of defining it is to say, it's the story I keep telling myself about who I am. It's constructed by me and my environment, possibly influenced by parents and other influencers, but it ends up in a story. The story sort of reinforces that I'm separate from the whole, and reinforces then this duality, saying there is me against the world, and hence, if I want to survive, I have to fight for me, instead of saying, okay, I'm part of a whole, and how can I connect with the whole and interact with it. And I'll keep it brief. One final example. If we imagine for a moment the 5-year-old, maybe 4.5, bit before the ego really starts to form, they live in a tough household. Father is emotionally unstable, maybe has a drinking issue, difficult siblings. This is the youngest one. And it's a volatile, tough household to grow up in for various reasons. How do they survive? How do they cope? What coping strategies do they develop? And when we watch individuals, one of them will become very silent and simply disappear to their room. Another one may become a people pleaser, thinking, oh, I can strategically position myself with that one and they will protect me. Or they become a joker. Let's turn this into a fun thing and make everyone laugh, and then I won't be hurt. Or they become just as aggressive and volatile as the role models around them. And this is their go-to place. This is their coping strategy. This is the way to defend me. And this is how it develops into or becomes part of that story, the constructed story, and reinforces the separateness. And if we think about it, then any threat that I perceive becomes an attack on my self, my constructed story. And science shows us that the same cocktail of adrenaline and what be it is released when there is an attack to our persona, as when we are physically being attacked and our life is threatened. So ego, in summary, constructed story about me and who I am that I need to protect. And in protecting, because I feel it's separate and needs protecting. And the theory that we put out is, what if that's a misunderstanding? What if the story about who I am that I have kept telling myself is not true, or is outdated, at least? So that's it. Yeah. Sorry for the lengthy answer.
Thank you, Thor. For me, it's, pointing to currents that run really deep into some big themes there. But I guess if I was just to ask a question of, okay, so we've heard that, yeah, as a layperson, we've heard that. Now, a leader sitting in an organization, or us here on this webinar today, perhaps the next question could be something around, so why does that matter? How's that going to help me? You know, in practical terms, why do I need to develop an awareness around these patterns or this narrative if it has been serving me so far in particular? And it's a strategy that I think has been working quite well. Look where I am in life today.
Yeah, that's the tricky part, isn't it? You know, and thankfully, someone wise said, what got you here may not get you there. So the recipe that we've been using till today may not be the recipe to get us further. But yeah, I mean, as when the story we keep telling ourselves is confirmed and reinforced by successes, then it becomes even harder to deconstruct. Definitely. But let's paint the picture for another story. I like stories. At the same time, don't get stuck in story, you know. So an engineering, a guy with a doctorate in engineering takes over a plant, a manufacturing plant. The existing team below him has been there for a long time, let's say plus years, and they've not been unsuccessful. They've been quite fine. But he's been hired to take them to the next level and is feeling the pressure. At the same time, this is all new to him, so he's a little bit insecure. So, and let's give ourselves that he's the type who feels that knowledge is power, and that's made him successful up until now, knowing every detail. He's never held a plant management role. He's been in a more expert type of role, but now he goes into the meetings asking for every little detail and then challenging those details because that's what he's been very good at. The team becomes a little bit insecure as a result of this, and they don't like being exposed, not knowing what is being asked for. And as a result, they start asking their own teams to prepare all kinds of reports and calculations and gather data so that they can go well armed into that meeting to defend themselves against the questions coming from the new boss. And one very innocent question is that boss aware that their default mechanism of coping, asking the details, understanding the details, and maybe going a little bit far on that front, is causing all this extra work throughout the organization that he then never asked about? It wasn't needed, but those moments where you felt exposed were so painful to the executives below him that they always come well armed with information into the meetings for, you know, a long time. Even if he would stop doing it, they would still be there. So are you, dear plant manager, aware of the effect that you're overdoing it on the details because of your own insecurity is causing amongst the rest of your people? And is that how you would like them to be using their time and energy? Does that make sense, that example?
Thank you. It does to me. And again, if people would like to clarify anything or pop anything in the chat box, you're welcome to join the dialogue and you know, help us shape it to what is going to get the most meaningful for everybody here today. While people might be formulating their, sorry, carry on.
I do know a number of them, Anita. They have sharp minds and beautiful hearts, and I know a number of them will engage, I'm pretty sure, at some point.
Great. So I'm hearing that the scene is set for developing self-awareness, and that's the first step for anyone to take, is to take a look inside, right? Once we might have achieved that, and there might be many people who have done this work and have been doing it for many years, seasoned practitioners of self-awareness on this call, What is to be expected then from a leader who is ego-free or freer of the defense mechanisms, their unconscious bias, their behaviors, their blind spots, etc.? What is it that you would then expect to see the shift, from to in that leader? How would they show up differently? And what would the value add and the benefit be to not just their own lives, but maybe the teams they're leading and the organizations that themselves that they are responsible for?
A good example would be Birgir Jonsson. He's the CEO of a new airline called Play. And he used to be a drummer in a heavy metal rock band. And he leads from the back. I've done a podcast with him, and he says, I give them the beat, but they stand front stage. And I make sure that they keep the rhythm by just motivating them and cheering them on. He sets a clear vision. He works on purpose and a longing for them to do something meaningful, and that pretty much gets out of their way, which then means he needs to trust and let go of any need to control every detail. Now, earlier in his career, he would be drilling people and asking for the details. And now for a while, he's just let go. And so there are many answers to the questions you pose, many answers, but I think one of them is someone who is less ego-driven. I'm doubtful that we can be completely ego-free, less ego-driven, know and can identify and work with their own ego patterns. They will be more trusting, less controlling, and focus more on bringing out the best in people and helping them do the same. And then hopefully, and I think Katrin will support this, the closer you get to your core, the more it's about helping others. The more it's about what Katrin called selfless leadership in her also new book. And the more the ego falls away, the more this becomes automated. So and if we look at some research, let's say Daniel Pink did massive research on behind his book called Drive. What is it that creates drive amongst people? One of the things is they want to do something meaningful, something purposeful. Another one is they want a certain level of autonomy, which means I have the freedom to act, which also means my boss gives me that space and doesn't micromanage me. And in the process of doing something meaningful and having the autonomy, most people get joy and out of growing and becoming better at what they do. So I think when he found this data in all kinds of research based on sociology, psychology, as well as economic research, he stumbled upon leadership that we say, okay, that's conscious, because that's saying, let's do something meaningful. I'm going to get out of your way. And by the way, let me know how I can help and support and make you better at what you do.
Absolutely. Thank you. So I'm curious, in terms of your own experience, Thor, in terms of understanding, you gave the example of the rock star who turned CEO. Can you give other examples to us of how you worked with and how you are now working with humanity at large in terms of helping people with understanding their egos, and what they've gained from that as a result? Because I think, as you say, those stories are really important and grounded in the context of business, work, culture, different environments. Maybe there's some common themes or threads that you can also help to draw. And in a moment, we can also start to check in around, specific environments, because South Africa, where we've got a large audience from today, could have slightly different nuances or realities playing out, yet there are also these universal themes. So it'd be interesting to hear a little bit more about that, if you will.
So how we work with the executives on this.
Yes, yeah.
Yes.
Coming down to the actual practical journeying with an executive team leader.
Yeah. I have to admit, Anita, that's in constant, let's say, development, how we do that. But one thing that has happened a lot is that we have to work on awareness at first. And a lot of the times, people, us included, myself definitely included, are not aware of our own patterns. And so we use different tools, like we may use a 360 assessment, where the gap between self-assessment and how other people, other important stakeholders see me, wakes me up to my own patterns. That could be one. We've used different personality tests. MDI Insights is interesting because it says, this is what Thor looks like under moderate stress, and this is what Thor looks like under extreme stress. And that's not a pretty picture. And the worst part is it's pretty true. If I get into that mode, I can show those sides, and that's something I need to then deal with. And so we bring their awareness to, this is what the test is saying. This is what other people are saying. How does that sit with you? And is that something you'd like to work on as a starting place? And then if we take, I just posted something on LinkedIn today about Mike Dennett, who is the CEO of BMW Financial Services in the UK. We then worked through the inner compass, which is part of the book, the new book. And what is your truth, Mike? And why are you here? What's your purpose? And one of his answers was, and I can reveal it, I don't think it's in the book, but he said, it's not the product itself that particularly excites me, it's the people and the environment that we can create. And there's a story in the book actually about him where he's joined by a new member of the senior team coming from Germany as an expat. And the guy says to him, I need to talk to you about the senior team. There's something off about it. He's new. Yeah, he's been there a couple of weeks. And Mike says, sure thing, let's have a coffee. And they sit down and says, so what's off about the team? And he says, where are the alphas? And he says, what do you mean? Well, I don't see any alpha males on the team. I don't see any alphas. And he says, so what if you don't see any alphas? And the guy said, how can you be so successful as a team without alphas? And Mike, in that moment, said that was a moment of, let's say, achievement, because that's what he'd been aiming for, to show that you can be successful without this typical alpha aggressive behavior on his senior team.
That's powerful. That's really wonderful. And I'm sure being challenged like that in a situation by an alpha couldn't have been an easy one, to stay centered and poised and in his truth and communicating that. Fascinating. Yeah. I would love to hear more.
Yeah, sorry, I'm looking at all the questions or comments. Are you going to address those? I love the one from Thomas. Or sorry, your call, Anita.
Yes, let's take a look at these questions. Thank you. So, hi Anita, based on the previous sharing from Thor, my question is, in his opinion, is a servant leadership style an example of an egoless leader?
Yes.
And to what extent does Thor believe that executive salary structures and incentive support an ego-driven mindset? Great question, Leanne.
Oh my God, yeah. I think the whole system is rigged to service the old paradigm of ego. And I've been part of executive development programs where young people were being groomed for management, and this was part of keeping them in the business, etc., etc. But they were treated like royalty, as in, look what lifestyle you can have if you make it to the top. And I always remember it sitting not right with me. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, the payment bonus schemes do not align particularly well, where the top few are being paid excessively with conscious leadership and bringing out the best in people. Interestingly, in Daniel Pink's study book, Drive, on average, across the population of the company, once you've paid people enough to take the issue of money off the table, more money doesn't create consistently more results. It is other things like these three things: autonomy, purpose, and mastery, that do. So there's clear evidence that the old paradigm with bonuses and hierarchies and underlying fear-based tactics, carrot and stick, I guess, are outdated and can be replaced by, let's say, purposeful servant leadership.
Thank you. So Thomas's comment to everyone and to Thor is, Gurdjieff said, man can only evolve by self-remembering. Buddhism is saying the same thing and seeing reality as it is without a filter. Alan Watts, the great British philosopher, says there's nothing to get and no book, guru, will ever be able to help you get it. So how do you think your book, Thor, can really help people wake up?
I think this comment is spot on and totally true. And I know for a fact that some people in the audience have followed a similar path to mine, where, whenever I was in the vicinity of a Barnes and Noble, I felt drawn to it. I would walk out with 20 books at least. One of them must have the answer. One of them has it, and although I would be continually excited, by the new thing that I just read about, it didn't last. And it wasn't until through a series of incidents in my life, I was forced to look inside, that I found the answers. So the Inner Compass, for example, was a series of downloads in meditative state. Now, whether that came from a global consciousness or my subconscious from having read all those books, it doesn't really matter. What matters is that the clarity of the answers that were coming was new to me. And I think Thomas is spot on. So I think my book, what I'm encouraging people to do is walk that path. And if you do that halfway through the book and say, I don't need it, well, great. It's all the answers are there. But we've been conditioned by ourselves in our environment to not look there. You must know that there's a brilliant story about this mullah who is walking down the street, and he sees there's a guy in his garden looking for something, and a neighbor comes by, and he says, what are you looking for? And the guy says, I'm looking for my car keys. And he said, do you want any help? And all of a sudden, both of them are there, lying on 4 feet in the grass, looking for the car keys. And the mullah comes walking past, and he says, what are you guys looking for? We're looking for his car keys. He lost them here somewhere. Are you sure they're here? No, they could be inside the house. So why are you looking here? Oh, there's much more light out here. What a stupid story. It's all inside. So yeah, you don't need my book. Not really.
However, it's useful to have a compass to help to navigate the territory the journey will be for that individual to walk.
Very true. And I think we all have one. It's just, are we connected to it? I'm not giving you the compass for you. It's just a path towards your own. Yeah.
Yes. I'm going to go through a couple more questions because there's some really nice questions here, if we may. So Marianne Lansfield is just a comment. The problem is it's hard to nudge the ego-driven boss to shift. Yeah.
Well, when I first started delivering self-help courses many, many years ago, I had 3 courses a week, 40 per course, 120, and I wasn't connecting with all of them. And I went to my old mentor, Conrad. He had been the owner of that business before I took it over with a colleague. And he said, I only have one question for you, Thor. You say you can't reach all the people. I said, yes, I cannot. There's at least 3 or 4 in every class that I cannot properly reach. And he says, okay, here's the question then. Are you God? How do you expect to reach all of them? So A, on that question, we'll never reach all of them. That's utopian. But how to nudge, I think one part I've already addressed with the personality tests and the 360s, because what we bring into the game then is someone else's scientific sort of neutral perspective, not mine as a coach, not one of their employees or their boss. A number of people that they picked give an answer in the 360, and a psychological test gives you a picture as well. So it changes the perspective. And I think probably the first step in nudging someone is checking what perspectives they have access to at this point in time, and whether a new and fresh perspective might be a game changer for our conversations.
I mean, in the simplest terminology, to respond to Marianne, something like, you can take a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. To Leanne's comment there, that not all executives and leaders are open to being vulnerable. So I've had that experience, and it sounds like there's quite a wealth of experience in the room here today where one can do all the battery of tests, 360s, etc. But if that person is not ready, if the fruit is not ripe, it's not going to fall off the tree.
No.
And then it's casting pearls before swines, literally. But it's given that opportunity, and it might not land now. It might land for them in 10 years' time as well.
Yeah, true.
And I think that, to your point, Thor, what your mentor, coach, guide was saying to you was something about we're not God. And actually that timing and that readiness isn't in our hands. We can deliver the message. We can be the instrument. The tune will play through us, but who it reaches and who it penetrates, that's out of our control, isn't it?
Yeah. We use a method, and this might be helpful for that part. We use a method from Patrick Lencioni's 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, which is get executives to sit in a circle and share stories from their childhood, especially periods of time that were difficult in some way, or even particular incidents. And I remember we were doing this with a company in the UK, and during a pilot, we had some of the senior executives. They had to go through this, and they were frowning, and they were not too cool about this. And then the exercise went through, and it was absolutely breathtaking what the first couple of people shared, and then everybody followed suit. And then we won the contract. We've had that one for 6 years. We're still at it. And they made a request. They said, whatever concept you end up with, make sure that exercise is in it. And I think there is a psychological thing that helps us. For a lot of us, it's okay to talk about early childhood because that's not who I am anymore. But it does break the ice on vulnerability. And a surprising side effect is that many of the patterns that were there in childhood are still visible in adulthood. So they start to connect the dots. Mm. So get them, it's an easy way to get people to open up a little bit.
Nice. Yes. Thank you. That's a great example. Another question from Leanne, a practical question grounded back in the world of the financial and the remuneration, you know, and how this is playing a part and an extent in this ego-driven versus ego-less mindset. She asks, to what extent does executive salary structures and incentive support an ego-driven mindset?
Well, obviously, if I am incentivized heavily as a CEO, and I'm keen on that money, I really want to see that sum in my bank account. Some may be tempted to really start to push the rest of the organization quite hard. And let's say they do not get their results immediately, they may push a bit harder to the point where they come across as aggressive or dominant or micromanaging or not trusting in some way. And that causes a ripple effect. People become a bit apprehensive, a bit cautious towards them. They start to focus on certain things that seem to matter and cut off ties with other departments because that's risky business. And so one of the effects is that if you start leading too aggressively, too ego-minded, you may end up with an organization where this relational connection between people is reduced, collaboration is reduced, creativity, finding creative solutions is reduced, and you get stuck in silos. And these silos are all trying to survive, but as a whole, they're not really thriving. But I'm not sure that was the question, was it? Yeah, I mean, that's how they support an ego-driven mindset. But we see a lot of companies, my own included, saying we can't operate in that anymore. We need one system for everyone. And I'm working with a bank that has completely revolutionized their bonus system, where previously it would be the big deal makers that were getting the heavy bonuses. And now it's everyone, including the kitchen staff and the cleaners. And that's transforming their business.
Absolutely. And that was going to be my next question is, do you have examples to cite where you're working with the ecosystem? So one isn't just working with, call it the personalities or that board or that executive leadership group who are putting the pressure on the peer pressure and in the system, but how can you then transform the consciousness of the entire system so that the system itself is finding its new harmonization to become a social enterprise, or its consciousness rises above these old patterns? Because to break that, I would think, would be one of the most powerful and important ways of sustainably transforming the organization, the leaders, and each individual themselves.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're living in totally exciting times, Anita. And I wish I could guarantee myself another 100 years on this planet, because I'm so curious about what's going to happen. If Hans Rosling is right in his TED talk, we will level out at something like 11 billion people. Once we level out, the growth that all the business models are built on will then have to come from taking market share from someone else. It's a whole different game. And if you mix into this development the fact that the general awareness and the transparency on data regarding climate change, global warming, whatever you want to call that, the pollution in the oceans, the need to save our planet. And my kids, 20 and a little bit more than 20 years old, they're big on this. You know, we guys are inheriting this place from you, and it's not in the shape that we need. So I think there was this mindless exploitation of resources that you are tempted to participate in because of the bonuses and the way the system is structured, will not survive. I can't see it surviving. And then the question is, you know, what's the option? And the option is a much more conscious approach. I think it was Gandhi who said that the planet has enough resources for every man's need, but not for every man's greed. Do we need to work from a higher consciousness place where the greed isn't there? Or, you know, I think we need to appeal to the best in ourselves and others to let go of the separateness and embrace more non-duality. We are all in this together. We are all connected, and let's start leading that way.
I love that, Thor. So powerful. Yes. Thank you. I have another question going back to a style of leadership from Leanne. Her question is, in your opinion, Thor, is a servant leadership style an example of an egoless leader?
I'd say when it's about the whole, rather than all about me, it's less ego-driven. But I saw Catherine's question there, and it's a damn tricky one. And I think it's related to this.
Can we go there?
Yeah, it says, so how do we ensure that we're not just substituting a new ego story for the old one? Only now it's a humble, purpose-filled servant ego. Very difficult question. I'd love Catherine to jump in, but I can say that checking in with ourselves and checking in with our intention and purpose, and really saying, is this a, what do you call it, the long con for myself to get what I want, but by playing a different game, or is it selfless entirely?
And that's where the ego becomes so much more refined and slippery.
Yes, it's you know, every threat, every grievance that we hold on to, everything that we can't forgive and let go of, is fuel for the ego. It says, look, see, I protect you, listen to me, I'll take care of you. And so that, you know, some people will say, can we ever let go of that? What would happen to our sense of fashion and dress sense if we didn't have ego?
Yeah, so you know, Thor, that I'm a bit more radical there, right?
I know. Yeah.
Because for me, it's really, that's an issue I have with, I'm totally in favor of, I mean, you know, I love your work and the book and this whole approach, and any approach that gets us away from the ego-driven stuff, I'm super happy. Yeah. And I support wholeheartedly. The thing I always, or my ego worries about, is that when this becomes just the new story, right, then we get the same problem. And yes, I mean, this is just theory, but it's not really a problem. But in the spiritual circles, there also the spiritual ego. Yeah, so the yes, one who can recite all the texts and has read all the books, right, Thomas? and can quote everyone, but this is now the new personality. So for me, I think it's crucial that we go all the way to seeing the ego as a construct and not being able to reconstruct it in the sanctimonious, oh, now I'm a servant leader and I'm serving everyone and I'm such a good person variant, because then it's still an ego.
Yeah. And please give me a checklist so I know if I'm being a servant leader. Yeah.
Yes.
And the to-dos behind every check so that I can,
Yeah.
Absolutely. No, I mean, spot on, Catherine, as always. As always.
Thank you, Catherine. That was something that had come to mind for me as well. It was this comparison, on the spiritual path, the spiritual ego that gets developed. And it becomes really slippery territory and something that we all need to help each other and keep a watch out for. And I think back to, just cycling back to closing off now on this call, because we've coming to a close in terms of time today, is the work that's being put out, and to your point, Thor, where you said earlier, your work is evolving constantly with clients, because I think as new tools and ways and methods of working with leaders evolve, because consciousness is obviously infinite, right? We find new ways to solve for these problems. And that's what I'm finding very much today, is that the old ways of serving my clients, the old models are just, they've almost died inside me. It's like they're no longer relevant. And I think we're all being called to search deeply for, within, but also what is the support that we now need to work with this in a new way. And there are timeless traditions that I think can be pulled into this. And I'm most curious to, just to keep following Thor and your work on the inner compass and where that's going to lead your teams and organizations up in the north. And here as we innovate down in the south, and how can we keep this learning and sharing and cross-pollinating with each other to solve for these deep
good questions.
Yeah.
I think I'd like to start with something that an old friend said to me recently. He said, surround yourself with people who seek the answers. Stay the heck away from people that have all the answers. And I, the beyondego.com platform is what this whole thing is really about. And it is a place where people can come together. And there's a curated library. There are podcasts, videos, books, articles, etc., that help people inform themselves. Later on, we'll set up a community, launch an app, really boost this and get it going. But the book is sort of promoting it. And in the book, I encourage the reader to go on their own journey of seeking answers rather than giving them answers. And there are some, let's say, convictions of mine. And that the trickiest thing about this book, I think, is that as soon as it comes out, it may be outdated in some way. We're evolving all the time, and a year or 2 or 3 or 5 years, book will still be there, but there will be a new level of consciousness and awareness and a new level of knowing. And I hope it stays that way, because it means we're growing. And it's almost like saying we choose uncertainty rather than certainty, whereas the ego prefers certainty, even at the cost of being wrong in the eyes of other people.
Yes, very much so. Yeah, I mean, the ego will sometimes defend its position right to the death.
But I mean, Anita, the timing of this is perfect. The book is coming out on Thursday. And we decided to make it free. as a Kindle version. I
I
understand you
saw
don't
that.
even need to. Yeah, I understand you don't even need to own a Kindle. I think you can download the Kindle app to your iPad, to your phone, and then just download the book. Yeah, Nikki and Catherine are the techies that I know. They know this. So yeah, so a free copy of the book on your iPod or your phone or your computer is our contribution and to the awareness raising.
Amazing. Thank you. And to the audience today, thank you all for being here, holding the space and being present for the dialogue. Please leave us a review. Let us know your feedback on this. And if you would like, you can email me on Anita@innerFLOW. I'll put that in the chat. Send your review, and we'll also ensure, if you're interested in attending Thor's book launch coming up, we'll make sure that the Strategic Leadership Group will be sending you an invite to that, which I think automatically grants you to this free ebook on attendance, no strings attached, I believe, which is wonderful. And as well as your name being entered into a draw to attend one of Thor's retreats in Iceland. So these are all gifts for being part of this call today. Thank you, Thor, for this connecting, that we can extend this ecosystem and this work out into the world.
And thank you, Anita, for the opportunity, and very much for remembering all of those details that I keep forgetting. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. It's been an absolute joy and insightful. Okay, everyone. So I'll just put the details in the chat here. And again, you're welcome to email me. Thank you for that. And thank you for amazing questions that came through today. Really practical. And I think we had some interesting scenarios that I certainly heard and learned from.
Yes.
Hope you all did as well.